Now, obviously, this is a quite difficult topic, as quite a lot of that government policy hasn't actually been put in place as yet. But just to introduce myself, I'm Sue Jones, Director of Social Care for the Institute of Health and Social Care Management, and it is my absolute pleasure today to introduce Max, Sonia and Andy, who are going to be taking part in this roundtable discussion. So what I'm going to do is just going to go over to our guest speakers and get them to introduce themselves. So over to you, Max, first of all.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Max and my pronouns are they, them, and I'm a lecturer at Arden University. I'm also non-binary and bring a personal experience perspective to this roundtable discussion, and I look forward to speaking with everyone and speaking with yourselves and the conversations that we might have later in the Q&A. But thank you. Thank you,
Max. Andy?
Do you want to go to Sonia first?
Sonia.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name's Sonia Rye. I am the founder and director of Nectar HR. We are a HR consultancy. We work with lots of health and social care providers in the UK, and I'm really looking forward to today's discussion and talking about actual impact in the workplace and what we can be doing that's positive.
Super. Thank you, Sonia. Andy.
Hi, yeah, and I'm Andy, and I work for Sonia at Nectar HR as a senior HR consultant. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a boringly cisgendered male.
And certainly my pronouns are she, her as well. So thank you very much. Now, we do have some questions that we are going to pose. If anybody has got any specific questions at all, please do put them in the chat. We will try and answer them as we go along, or we will put them to our speakers as we go as well. So, as I say, we've got some questions. And the first question that I want to ask the panel is, what does a psychologically safe workplace look like for trans professionals? So who would like to go first?
The pressure's always on to go first, isn't it? Maybe I can go first. Can I speak a bit on behalf of myself? Yeah. So for me, I'm quite a responsive and open-minded and communicative person when it comes to my personal experience. So for me, having a space where I can be open and have conversations, I find makes me feel more psychologically safe, that I know I can have those conversations with people, and I am open to those discussions that may have an alternative point of view, but it's being able to have that space where you feel heard and you can hear other people as well. But when I feel like I'm not being heard, or people are shying away from those kind of conversations, I feel that kind of puts a bit of a restriction on where I'm working. But yeah, so for me, I feel like being able to just have those kind of conversations and people being ready to hear and listen, that makes me feel a bit more in a safer, more unit kind of concept, because I'm open-minded to people having questions, and because everyone's going to have questions, and I always think it's better to ask somebody than it is not to, and to potentially do your own research and go down that rabbit hole and end up being somewhere completely different. So I would rather people actually ask me, and I think that should then go both ways as well. Like, we should be quite open as trans people in the trans community for people having questions, but also vice versa, to have those kind of conversations and being able to have those kind of conversations without being shut down. Definitely from my perspective, I think that's one key point I'd like to pose, definitely.
Super, thank you. Sonia?
I mean, I can't answer that question as a non-trans person, so I think that was why it was really important that Max went first there, because I don't have that lived experience and I can't speak from that perspective. I can certainly speak from the perspective of having a protected characteristic, or what it feels like to be part of a workplace in general. And I think I very much second everything that Max has said. I would say it's an environment where you feel safe to speak up, where you feel you can be authentic, where you feel you can talk about, openly, respectfully, without kind of fear of judgment, without fear of perhaps retaliation. And the one thing that I would say is that when I've had conversations with employees in the past, just generally about protected characteristics, not necessarily trans, but in general, sometimes they might feel safe to speak up in the environment that they're in now, and they openly admit that they've been in environments before where they haven't felt that, and that can kind of hold them back because they feel, well, in my previous workplace or where I was studying previously, or another situation or another environment where they haven't felt safe actually impacts them in the environment where they're in now, even though they know deep down it's okay, they can be open, it is that culture that can hold them back sometimes. And I suppose that is a challenge for that employer or that workplace, because it's not necessarily something they're doing, but it's a previous lived experience.
Thank you, Sonia. Would you like to add anything there, Andy?
Yeah, so firstly, I'd like to echo everything that's already been said. But for me, it's what do I want out of my my workplace? I want I wanted to be treated with respect. I wanted to be treated with dignity, and if that's what I want for myself, then it follows that that's what I give to other people. And so it's about having a workplace where trans professionals in this context, but exactly as Sonia says, people with any protected characteristic or no protected characteristic are all treated with dignity and respect. And I think it's being open-minded, being prepared to listen, but also being curious. Challenge your own assumptions. Talk to people who have lived experiences that you don't, and get that insight.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we were discussing, weren't we, before we actually started this call, is this definitely is around the culture and the leadership of the organisation and the type of organisation that you want your employees to experience, which is really key to having that psychological safety. And the only way to do that, I mean, I know we follow Michael West. If it's not inclusive, it's not compassionate. So we have to really think about inclusivity as a whole. This really is all encompassing, isn't it? But specifically for people, because it is a challenge, absolute challenge for the trans community at the moment. So how do we really make sure that people feel safe? Super, thank you. So the next question is, what are 2 practical tips for creating those spaces, which again is a really important, we want people to come away with having that practical output as far as this session is concerned. Who would like to go first?
Go ahead, Max. You want to.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it, but I was thinking practical. I've got to look. I don't know if I can consider the practical from the position that I am within the workplace, because I think, as we had the conversation in the beginning, giving these tips out at this point might be quite difficult for others to implement right now, given the amendment that's just gone in and the final draft that we can't see. So it's only really knowing about what has been happening for me in the workplace, but what people will have to legally do or will be expected to do or can practically do would be quite difficult to suggest at this point. But some tips that's helped within my workplace was having a group discussion with HR and the executive team members. And it's not just ourselves as a LGBT community group, it was all groups that were part of this current movement, shall we say, because the right to be able to have to speak and the freedom of speech, everyone's points of view should be taken into consideration. So, but being able to have that kind of conversation with HR and the board of executives allowed us to feel like we could put our point forward, but also get feedback on what the organisation was doing. And this could be then a team leader meeting. It doesn't always have to be like an executive meeting. Arden is, I know, big but small in some respects, that we have quite a close relationship with execs and some execs. So we're able to have those kind of group discussions. And so therefore we could see what the organisation was doing, can do, and legally has to do, with what they're keeping up with, but also what we would like and how we could put those forward. So practically what you could do at this point is build a community of team members at several levels, where you create that open space, which takes us back to the first point of that psychologically safe space, being able to communicate and have conversations. This puts it into a space where you know that the organization themselves have certain members of the team which will know how you feel and will present what they're doing. That will probably build on that psychologically safe space as well. That is definitely one practical tip, but also ensuring, because you know here it's not all about just us as trans people, that everyone has also have a discussion you know who are in and involved in around this kind of whole scenario. And you know, women might need to have a discussion about how that's going to impact them and how this is changing for them and what their processes and procedures are for them and how they would go through and navigate this scenario and situation. You know, everyone that needs to be involved needs to kind of have those kind of psychologically safe space and open community groups. And so that's one tip definitely. And because I felt that really worked quite well for us as a community, because I was on the board of getting so stressed about potentially losing my job and getting really upset and not knowing what to do or where to go for the toilets and the bathrooms, and it was getting quite a bit of a stressful build up, because following from what like America's doing, and usually the UK follows on from that. When they started removing like the EDI departments and then removing people's jobs, and then the impact on trans people and trans people losing their jobs, I was just getting myself so hyped and worked up about the potentiality of losing my job, because you don't know where an organization will stand sometimes. You know, they might have a stance for EDI, and then when it's not legally binding, they suddenly no longer have this like kind of idea. So I was getting really stressed about it. And so it really did help having a conversation with HR and being able to put forward like what I would like, such as a communication, the organization then communicating their stance. And maybe that moves on to the next practical step, is having a formal communication to all members about where the organization stands, or where they can, even because I express obviously not everything that is happening right now they are allowed to avoid at most costs, so they're going to have to do those things even if they do impact my work day. If it does impact the toilets that I use, it's now, you know, those aspects that are legal and they have to follow. You know, I'm open to that. That's going to happen, but the organization will need to put forward their stance and their position about what they're going to do, and the processes they're taking, the steps, and then navigating and managing any impact that's going to have in regards to backlash, anti-trans movements, the presentations of like TERFs, and just negativity that comes back that is being using that kind of using this situation to be anti-trans, that then becomes problematic. So maybe that kind of like leads us into like 3. So just kind of like, a group open with several boards of members, the organization put forward their stance and position about what they're doing, and maybe step-by-step guidance that has things changed so everyone keeps up to date, but then also having processes and procedures for any anti-trans or any negativity that comes back and out from that, in an attack and in a defense. Everyone's entitled to opinions, as we know as well, but some people are using this to then attack trans people, which is not right. So kind of like boils us into 3, but I think that's probably where I put us in what we could do, I think, within the limitations of what we've got so far. I definitely think that would help. It certainly helped me feel more comfortable, and it extends from what we're saying about a psychologically safe space, but it's going to also be physically, because if you put in process procedures in place for any potentiality of backlash and anti-trans movements and aggressive comments and things like that, that could potentially happen in a location as well. So it could be, we're talking about moving from psychological to also physical, because you never know what's going to happen. So you're creating a good all-round safe space, which I think is what most people need, really, don't they, at work? So.
Absolutely. I mean, as it goes back to, this is about the leadership and the culture of the organisation, and if you're not showing people that you are compassionate about any, it doesn't, this is about any individual, then it just leads to the wrong outcomes, doesn't it, all round? Sonia or Andy, would you like to add to that?
Just before we jump in, so I just noticed a comment pop up in the chat from Jade asking for a fuller explanation of what a TERF is. I think, Max, you could probably explain that better than I can. I know what it stands for, I think, but and I can certainly give some examples of people who have been described as TERFs, but please.
Yes, no, it's trans exclusive or exclusionary radical feminists. So particularly feminists who focus on excluding trans people from their movement, or excluding trans women, mostly, from their movement, of a feminist movement. And it's usually hyper-aggressive attack on trans people, lots of bigotry and hate, rather than just a separation of groups. It's very negative usually, and can result in like aggressive tendencies, usually quite extreme, and in many extreme cases. So yeah, the word TERF is tend to be used. The feminist movements tend to include trans people, trans women mainly in their movements, but the word TERFs usually for those who exclude trans women from their movement.
So and it would be a complete tangent to talk about whether this is a fair description or not. But J.K. Rowling, for example, has been described by some quarters as a TERF, because she's definitely made some a reputation on social media, certainly for her views on the trans community. So I hope that covers that point. Sorry, Sue, I just wanted to make sure we covered that point off.
No, that's good. Thank you.
She
Andy.
also did, on that point, she also did put in a substantial amount of money into the movement of this definition as well. So how this movement is going forward and how it's changed was backed by J.K. Rowling. So it puts an emphasis on, though this definition may be moved forward through feminists and women wanting a clarity and definition, the backing of this substantial amount of funding that was put in by J.K. Rowling then now gives it this foundation of potential anti-trans movement, rather than trying to outline it as clarity and definition, because now it's being wielded as a tool to throw at trans people, to then exclude them from a multitude of things, and causing quite chaos for trans women. So when we think about J.K. Rowling was a feminist, she has a massive impact on this situation. And that's what we're going to look at. It's not just this definition change and clarity. You've got to look at everything that's underlining that, because that will have an impact on how people will take this and how people will use it as well. And it certainly has, from what I can see in the media, and especially on Twitter. If anyone's on Twitter and knows about J.K. Rowling's stance in Twitter, is that it's now being detrimentally used towards trans people, which is not great. So yeah,
a big reason for me not being on Twitter, actually.
Yes, I've come off Twitter now because of that, to be honest. But I know she
just can't stand
presence.
that sort of speak at all, and there's a lot of it. Okay, Sonia, did you want to add anything in terms of practical tips?
I think for me, the practical tips are probably like much smaller than some of the things that Max was talking about. I think you have to normalize certain things within your culture, rather than like right at the start, Max was saying, ask questions, be open, those kind of things. And I think that if you encourage certain things within your organization or your workplace and you normalize them, they're not kind of a, we can't talk about that, or we don't want to, you know, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to upset somebody. And that could be really, really simple things like, you know, on your HR system, having a specific area for how somebody identifies, normalizing sharing pronouns in emails, or, you know, at the start of a meeting when you're introducing yourself. You know, thinking about the space that we're talking about, like health and social care, it could even be something like flexibility with your uniforms. I know a completely different client of ours that's done that for a totally different reason, for a different protected characteristic, from a faith-based characteristic. So they've given some flexibility in uniforms because of that. So I think it's, you know, there's lots of little things that you can also be doing that actually give out that message, because it does all boil down to me, it's about culture. You know, we can write the best policies in the world, you know, so, you know, I'm not a fan of generic policies at all. But even if we get the most bespoke policy and it says everything and it's glowing and it's fantastic, it's just a piece of paper until we put it into practice. So, you know, for me, it's about really thinking about what you can do in your own organisation, getting ideas from different people. Don't think it's just, you know, on one person to have to come up with everything, and then getting feedback about, does this work? Is this actually, you know, giving us the desired result? Is it helping? Is it supporting? And then, you know, rejigging as you go along.
Super. Thanks, Sonia. Okay, so we're going to go on to something, and again, this is something that Michael West, Compassionate Leadership, he definitely speaks about having allies within the workplace and how important it is. If you want an inclusive culture within your organisation, is making sure that you are appointing allies as part of that, and really that is about listening, learning and acting. So you're appointing these people to really be the advocates of listening out and really looking at how you actually manage that within the workplace. So how can allies show up meaningfully in the workplace? If you've got these allies and you've put them in place, how can they show up meaningfully within the organisation? Again, open that up to whoever would like to go first.
I think everyone should just follow what Sonia said, really, like, because those small changes is what's going to make a big difference. Because having pronouns in your email signature already shows to me that you're noticing that not everyone will naturally use the binary pronouns, and therefore you're open to the idea that we should showcase that our appearance or our name doesn't necessarily relate to a specific pronoun. So therefore you highlight in that your email signature, and those small changes make big impacts in culture within an organization. And like Sonia was saying, some of the practical tips that I was giving might be quite big, because we're talking organizational change. So if you're talking about allies, we're talking about people within all departments and at all levels, and those small changes, I think, is what's going to make that big impact there. Most certainly, for example, just introducing yourselves in a meeting with your pronouns every time, that you never know who's going to be in there, and if any new people are going to be in there, or who's noticing and who's having those kind of conversations with, or if they're colleagues that you've been working with for a very long time. It shows where your stance is going forward in this current climate. So most definitely, I think those kind of the list of what Sonia was saying will most definitely help with allies. So certainly, and then I think one of those kind of things is being open to having those kind of conversations as well, by being educated and then having those kind of conversations for and on behalf of trans people, where you're able to, you know, not answering for in regards to things that you're not aware of, but having those kind of conversations if somebody had a question or was parading around statements which were incorrect. Will support trans and non-binary people in the workplace where possible, and where safe, and where psychologically safe and physically safe for yourselves as well, not putting yourself into a detrimental situation either. But having somebody answer particular statements that are made that might be incorrect or not very nice, or you know, certainly unkind and towards trans and non-binary people, having somebody answer those questions on and before, it will take that energy away from myself and take that burden off myself later on, especially if it doesn't get answered or pulled up, it then gets left, and so therefore people think sometimes that it's fine to do so. But I think at this point, allies, the smallest of changes are the most supportive usually. Even just wearing badges on your lanyards and things like that. Some people may think, oh, what's the point? But they actually do quite a lot. It does showcase where your stance is in your position, and we will catch an eye on that pride pin or that trans flag pin or that ally pin. And there is an ally pin as well, if people don't actually want to wear the pride flag. I know some people feel uncomfortable wearing a pride flag because they themselves might be somebody might assume that they are LGBTQ and or they don't want to step into that community too much. So but there actually is an ally pin, an ally flag, so you can use that as well. It's sometimes just about using those and showing up to events. If you have pride events or if you're putting on an event or things like that, you can show up to those events and have conversations and partake and get involved without having to be LGBTQ. Specific events for trans and non-binary people that happen, Remembrance Day in November and things like that, and being aware of those and being aware of those specific events for trans and non-binary people, because they will be going through those periods and those times within their work day potentially, or work week, and they might be having a particularly a day where you think that person doesn't look so well today, they're looking quite sad. And during Remembrance Week, we cover and we discuss all the people that have been murdered or have committed suicide or have passed away, or who are trans and non-binary, and then we mourn them at the end of Awareness Week. So being aware of those events yourselves and what we're going through and checking in with people also would help and support people. But I think what Sonia was saying definitely would be, for me, something allies can do, and we do notice. We know you, we know you, we know where the allies are, and we do. So for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking, from past experiences with a previous employer, a small organisation, but we had one non-binary person on the payroll. And I think it's just simple things, exactly as has already been said, by taking care to use the pronouns that they wanted to be used, to accept that sometimes you're going to make mistakes, but then to correct those mistakes. And be honest, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Silly things like, so we had a flagpole outside the building that normally just flew the corporate flag, but I bought an ally flag that we flew through the whole of Pride Month, which was a really visible demonstration that was up for 30 days that told everyone who walked, drove, or otherwise passed our premises that we were allies. And this sort of thing, right back to point Sonia made earlier about having the foundation of good solid policy documents that are inclusive, but then living, not just letting those policies sit on a notice board or somewhere on SharePoint, but living by them.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. Sonia, did you want to add anything there? I know that you started that
I was going to say,
before it was even asked.
I just second everything that's been said, really. Yeah, definitely.
I love the fact that I wasn't aware of the ally pin, so thank you very much for that, Max. I will definitely be getting that. So yes, I'll look into that and recommending it on the compassionate leadership, definitely. So I know we've sort of covered it, but I just wanted, because there's a couple of bits at the end of this question that I think is really important. So how can we respond to everyday challenges, e.g. pronouns that we've discussed, toilets misgendering, but really most importantly, with kindness and clarity? How do we do that within the workplace?
I would say it comes down to respect, really, about how you communicate those messages. And I think there's a number of ways you can communicate those messages. So sometimes it's a situation comes up and you have a conversation respectfully with somebody about, so they've raised a query or they're not understanding something, so you have that conversation respectfully. But I also think it's around things like training. You know, Andy knows we run a lot of unconscious bias training in the workplace. It takes a while to deliver that training because there's so much to cover, and we do go quite deep in that training. We really want people to feel it's a safe space to really think about their unconscious biases and actually where have they come from. You know, we talk about childhood, we talk about flippant remarks our grandparents may have made that may have stayed with us. We think about what we see on the news, what we see on our state. You know, we really go into kind of like, where have I got those biases from, or where am I forming these opinions from? And I think things like that are also really important because it makes people, the purpose of that training isn't that in 2.5 or 3 hours they're well aware of all their unconscious bias and everyone skips out the room. It's about them starting to reflect more, and it's about probably the start of a journey for a lot of people. So it's how can we bring that in, so actually some of these conversations people will already know why we're doing that, or they understand why we're doing something a certain way. And yeah, we could reinforce a conversation with respect, but we've got a lot of training to underpin it, our culture underpins it. Then thinking about like, okay, well, we've run a whole series of training, but what about every new starter that comes through that door? Do they understand what we stand for? Not just within a trans environment, but generally, you know, do they understand what our values are, how we live them, and how we kind of ensure that those behaviors are day in, day out. So for me, it's not just having a conversation when something arises and kind of saying, oh, but that's just, you know, legally we have to do this, or actually, you know, it's about being respectful and thinking about the different ways that you communicate those messages on lots of different levels.
Super. Thank you, Sonia.
If I can take this point to address the elephant in the room, and that is the Supreme Court judgment from a few months ago that really sort of, you know, brought this conversation to the forefront, really. You know, when that came out, you know, a lot of the commentary was, this is great, we've got this Supreme Court judgment, we now have complete clarity on how to define a woman. But for me, as an HR professional, it gave me no clarity at all. And I think for the trans community and the non-binary community and other communities, it probably created very little clarity. And, you know, you've seen now in the way, you know, certain organisations have responded to that. You know, the Women's Football Association, for example, the way they responded to it. Other, you know, missives that have come out about right. So, you know now, you know, a female toilet is designated a women-only space, or is it? So, you know, as much as the commentary was, hurrah, we have clarity, for me, I think it's clouded the issue even more.
And I think with the response to that is figuring out how to respond with that with kindness and clarity. And I think in regards to how the Football Association did, they didn't really do it very much with kindness. I think they excluded trans people almost overnight once they got the report and definition about where trans women align with single-sex spaces and what a single-sex space was. And then the toilet issues resulted in a lot of problematic physical violence in some cases, not all just for trans women, but also for cisgender women who may just have short hair and things like that. So it became a difficult space to navigate, not just for trans women, the toilets. Pronouns, you know, we've had a discussion about how to deal with that, how to present with that with kindness. And I think what Sonia was saying about training, from a personal experience, I did have a situation where somebody wasn't using the correct pronouns, and so we had a conversation with HR, and I explained, I don't want this to disrupt my relationship with this person because I have a very good relationship with this person. I want something that we could use to move forward. And so this, so HR presented some training and developed the training, and me and this person still have a really good, fantastic relationship. That was because that person was also open to that kind of training and open for those kind of conversations. So I made it clear I did not want this to become something problematic, because I don't want my work life to become problematic, and I'm not here to attack my work colleagues with those kind of situations. And I think misgendering in pronouns, they can come through those kind of conversations. But when it comes to the toilet scenario, we are all still very much on that rocky boat at the moment, out at sea, not knowing what we need to do. As soon as you implement something, it changes again, and then it might change again. And right now, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we haven't seen the final draft, so we don't know what's going to happen, but we can only imagine it's not going to do well or bode well for trans women. So considering how you would deal with that, or that situation first and foremost, and also the extension of that if it leads to extreme behavior, which it inevitably in some circumstances will, as some people are using this definition or clarity of definition to attack trans people. Kindness and clarity would be having those kind of conversations with a trans person about what it is that you are expected to do and how you are handling it, but also to see how they're feeling about it, and what they would like from it, even if that is something that you can't do. You know, they might express or have that space where they'd be like, this really isn't what I want, this is not what we should be happening. And having that empathy in the leadership role that we're talking about, and management, having that empathy to give them that space to like almost offload the fact that this is happening to them, because it is not nice to have to deal with. But through the clarity, as much as you can, explain as much as you know. And if you don't know anything, as in Andrew saying, it doesn't really give much clarity, then explain. There's not much clarity here for me just now. I'm trying to work with what I've got. Most trans people probably already know anyway, because we will be watching and reading every change that happens right now, because it affects our life. So if we don't understand it, and also you don't understand it, but you're open to communicate that you don't understand it, but you're doing it the best you can, then we've just got to navigate it as a team. But it is to get as much clarity as you possibly can on this situation, so you can handle it with kindness by knowing what you can and can't do, or what you should and shouldn't do, and what other people should and shouldn't be doing as well. Because somebody attacking somebody for going into the bathroom, who may not be going into the right bathroom based on what they're legally now allowed to do, it's not right that somebody shouldn't be doing that. But having the conversations now are going to have to be with every party, because you need to have a conversation with somebody about what bathrooms they're going to be using and what they can use by what you know, but also how that other person was handling it was not acceptable, and that how you're going to be handling that situation as well. And then having a conversation with the other person about how they handled that, to say that that wasn't acceptable, regardless if that person was in the incorrect bathroom at that time in place. And so just like navigating kind of like, and it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult for everyone, certainly once everything comes out. And the first couple of weeks, the first couple of months, it's going to be the hardest, because everyone's going to be testing the water. Everyone's got to try and figure it out. So I myself understand that my organisation's also testing the waters. So I have empathy for them and what they're going through, and hopefully they'll have the same back for me when or if I'm in a space where I'm like, oh no, I shouldn't be here, and I shouldn't be doing this, and I shouldn't be, and if I've experienced any issues as well. I think that's would help, even if you don't know anything and you're trying to figure it out. I think for me it would be helpful that you relay that as well, to say that you're figuring this out together, because we are all going through it together in this space, isn't it, really? Definitely.
Absolutely.
I can just just want to chuck something in there, because of course, you know, we're talking here about the impacts of government policy on the trans community, and that is the topic. But I also sort of want to just mention, mentioned earlier, there are some opposing views that I might not necessarily agree with, but that doesn't mean that they're not valid. So we should be mindful that there are a group of people, in the main cisgendered women, who are survivors of domestic or sexual abuse by male partners, who have a genuine fear, rational or irrational, not the topic for this discussion, that biological males can use by self-identifying as trans, for example, as a way of bringing harm to those women, and actually I think that is what ended up with the Supreme Court judgment having to be made. But it's still created an issue. So, of course, we're here talking about the effect of the policy on the trans community, but I think we also need to be mindful that there is another group of people that this also affects.
Definitely, I think you should consider it too as well, and we should consider all aspects. As I said, we have freedom of speech, and we should consider all parties involved. But you should definitely do the research completely involved in these kind of discussions that we're having, because it's quite detrimental to say that a trans woman, because now we've got the categorization of biology situating what a woman is and isn't, would even abuse anyone, let alone a cisgender woman. And we're talking about cisgender men abusing women, it's a cisgender man. So what we'll come into really is, regardless of a trans woman's positioning, it does just come down to genitalia in regards to anything, if we're going down to biology. So what we're doing is we're just saying, because the person has a penis, that they're going to abuse me, rather than any other social, cultural stance that person has, or life as well. But also trans women do also get abused and raped and murdered and killed and things like that, and it's about also providing space for them too, and also the space, because the spaces were integrated before. But also I don't know if anyone else is here and how much that but I haven't heard of any single sex space where a trans woman has stepped into, especially in regards to abuse and violence, that has then abused or become violent towards anyone in that space as well. So statistically, and this comes down to evidence-based approach really, isn't it, which was what we all want to do, is in these scenarios and situations that we now have to contend with even more, I don't think a lot of it is based on evidence, because evidence doesn't show that trans women are actually presenting abusive behavior in these spaces, let alone prior to these spaces anyway. But I do understand the fear that comes from, can come for people who have been part of abuse and violence. So it's not something that I want to say, oh, then we have to integrate trans women, or then we shouldn't integrate trans women, because this is definitely a topic I think is quite sensitive, where we can need to consider both sides of the story as well. It's definitely a hard situation, but most certainly, as I said before, everyone I think involved in this situation should be, or should have a space to be able to communicate their thoughts on and opinions on that, so everything can be navigated in a way that is kind, and in a way that has empathy, because it does impact trans people. But again, it's also going to have a different impact for cis women as well, in the scenarios, for example, Andy, that you were saying, if trans women aren't in those spaces as well. So definitely.
And there's just been a comment in Chris in the chat. Is it legal to bar guide dogs from a location on the grounds that someone has a fear of dogs, potentially after an attack? You know, it's this irrational. Well, it's not. I mean, it's something that they have experienced. I'm not saying that, but it is not on the right grounds, because you're minimizing something that isn't very, very unlikely to happen.
And I think you're moving it from one to another, being abused and experienced violence from a cisgendered man, to trans women who are part of, even if you're combining them to the same category as biologically male, they don't live as, or haven't lived as, and certainly haven't have similar hormones for a very long period of time to biological men. But also violence perpetrated towards women can be generally from men that know that person, and more likely to be somebody that they know, like a partner. So if it's more likely to be that than a random trans woman going into a bathroom, a public bathroom at most, which is usually the conversation, to then perpetrate violence, is statistically and very highly unlikely to happen. What's likely to happen, which has been happening and shown to be happening recently, is that trans women are starting to experience violence just going into the bathroom, in public bathrooms and spaces as well, nonetheless. So when we look at the evidence and we look at the media, it does suggest that it's more likely to be the other way around than it is towards. But the fear is going to come from lived experience, like you were saying, Sue. So there is going to be a fear that, but looking at the rhetoric that follows through from Section 28 and gay men and things like that. It's just this other, I think, rhetoric at the moment that we're working through, and we've just got to look at that about what the foundation is and where this is coming from and how does it, and if it does, to what likelihood is it to impact the community and what they're saying. Definitely.
Yeah, and again, we're going back to that leadership and culture experience, aren't we? You know, if we want people to experience psychological safety, because it's actually better for workplaces to have people who feel psychologically safe, then you've got to be open, and people need to. And I'm just wondering, because it sort of links into the next question in terms of what advice would you give to someone experiencing discrimination or exclusion at work? But and certainly not in workplace, but outside of work, where I have heard people say something derogatory about trans women. When I challenge them, which I do, it is often it isn't accurate. Their thoughts are not accurate, but it's having the ability within the workplace to be able to challenge and to feel that you can challenge as well. You know, that, well, you know, on what basis are they saying those things? On what evidence do they actually have in terms of the accuracy of what they're saying? So on that basis, what advice would you give to someone experiencing discrimination or exclusion at work? And perhaps I'll come to you, Sonia, from a HR perspective.
I think it's really simple. You need to go to HR and you need to go and speak to somebody that you feel safe talking to. Any HR worth their salt is going to support you through that process, talk to you about your options. We'll definitely talk through different options, and one of them will be raising a grievance. But it depends what you have got concerns over. Like Max gave a great example of you know, a situation with a colleague where Max went and spoke to HR, and you know, some training was rolled out, and you know, there is now a different environment. But it might not be that. It might be, actually, I feel discriminated against, I feel like I'm being bullied or harassed or something like that. And that is something that, you know, certainly every organisation that we work with takes very, very seriously, and that needs to be investigated appropriately. And then the organisation needs to decide what it's going to do with whatever evidence or whatever findings come out of that as well. So for me, it's really simple. You need to go and speak to your HR, who you should feel safe, you know, going to talk to, and you know, working through your options and looking at what works best for you. But if it is something serious, then for me that has to be a formal complaint, you know, via a grievance.
And go back. So have you got anything to add there?
So I think, yeah, for me, exactly as Sonia said, I also want to circle back slightly to the question that Chris asked in the chat. And I think Chris asked the question probably knowing what the answer is, but I just want to cover that off because it actually ties into this question as well quite neatly. Yeah, I thought it was a great question because it shows that if you follow the logic, you know, from where we are to, you know, well, how does this apply to other groups? Then, you know, at what point does the logic fall apart? And I think the answer is quite quickly. But you know, the answer to that is, of course, if you were to bar a guide dog from a location because somebody else has a phobia of dogs, then you are discriminating against a disabled person because you're not allowing them the reasonable adjustments that they need to be able to get around their everyday lives. You know, so that was a brilliant question because it exposes, you know, the logical fallacy that is underpinning a lot of this, the thoughts around supporting around, you know, the needs of the trans community. But yeah, from an HR perspective, you know, I couldn't add anything, you know, substantial to what Sonia has said.
Yeah, I agree as well. And if not, straight to HR, whoever you do feel comfortable with, that might be your manager. If you are a manager and somebody has come to you, you recommend that they go to HR. But if they don't feel comfortable, could you mention to HR a situation that's happening? and ask them for some advice. Sometimes I find that when I'm working with students, they might not want to go to the next level, or they find it very difficult to go to the next level. They find it there's a barrier in the way for them, you know, a wall that they've made, or tension that they feel, or they feel anxious, or things like that, that they go to the person that they feel most comfortable at the time, but they can't themselves go any further for that. But it might need you to take that next step, to inquire on their behalf. Or you might just inquire on their behalf anyway, without mentioning any names. A situation has happened, and what would we do in this situation? And you can always feedback, oh, by the way, without mentioning any names, I've inquired about this situation, and this is what we're going to do. That to me would just showcase that you're looking out for me, and you're looking beyond our immediate like conversation, and you're trying to make me feel safe, and showcasing that you'll take action if need be, because then you can ask if I want to take action from there as well. So sometimes if the person doesn't also feel comfortable, if you are that person, or if you're just a shared colleague as well, I might just speak to another colleague of mine and about something I experienced, and they might give me some advice. They might also go and speak to somebody else as well and feedback to me. And it's that shared kind of network that we have in those kind of conversations. And it doesn't necessarily always have to go to HR, because sometimes having that conversation with another colleague who, let's say if somebody kept repeatedly misgendering me in a meeting, my other colleagues will just then highlight my pronoun. One might jump in and say my pronoun, oh, this is Max's pronoun. Another one might say it a little louder when they're talking about me. And it's those micro changes that they've done in that meeting, and in being purposeful in their emails, that changes. It's a domino. So by having that conversation with HR after explaining to the person on several occasions, this person did change, but now it's kind of set a domino that most people change. Even now I have new staff members come in. I don't need to actually say anything. The communication within my team is so robust with my pronouns, because one person has purposefully made a conscious effort, 2 people have, 3 people have, and it's kind of just gone like that. So now I don't even have to introduce myself to new staff members anymore. So you could just be that person that might say, you know, and as Max said, they like to, and just that heightened little tone changes. It's not aggressive, it's just heightening it to be heard, because I'm somebody who speaks really fast. So if I'm talking about somebody, if somebody else speaks really fast, you could kind of skip through, and some people might not actually know what you said at that point. But heightening something that you say and do and things like that. And when some people talk about pride, and some just might go, woo, pride, you know, you might not even go to pride, but you're excited for those people. Those kind of like micro things that you do shows other people like where you stand. And but yeah, if you are that person's go-to, they might not always want to always go to HR, but by knowing the policies, by knowing the process and procedures, you could also offer advice to say, well, as part of our policies and procedures, you know, I think at this point you probably should put in agreements. But if you want you want somebody to help you or sit in the meetings, I'm happy to do that as your friend and as your colleague and as a support, or as your line manager, as your, and things like that. So you can offer those kind of things. Sometimes just having somebody there is also really supportive too. Definitely. Cool.
Super. Thank you, Max. And I'm thinking it with, because you were just really focusing then, I think, on having those, whether they're self-appointed allies that are actually have been there, and they've recognised and understood and empathised with your situation and took it upon themselves to actually do that. So, but I think sometimes that's great when people do that, but do people need some additional leadership skills to understand that? How do they sense, how do they listen to those cues that would enable them to say, you know what, that's not right. We need to do something about that. Having that allies in place, is that something?
I think being conscious, I think that definitely being conscious to these situations, and as Sonia, Jenny brings it down to, and Andy mentioned before, many characteristics as well, is being conscious of some of the conversations that are being had, where underlining they're explaining an issue that they're experiencing, and thinking about ways that you could indirectly support that person without making it a big deal for everyone, without singling anyone out, and just showing that, oh, this is where I am and this is what we should be doing. Because this is how I'm presenting my behaviour towards you. It's quite simple, it's quite easy, and it's making that micro change. Definitely, I think, but be conscious, which comes down to this unconscious bias, isn't it? We might not do those because unconsciously we don't need to, because we don't think it's going to hurt anyone, and it's not going to bother. So that definitely comes into tie in with that training that you deliver.
Super. I think we've covered the final question on how can we address tensions around inclusive language and gender neutral practices. I think we've sort of addressed that. So what I would like to do is really give the opportunity for anybody to ask any questions, people who are on the call. Has anybody got any specific questions? Because I'm conscious we've got 5 minutes left. Anybody want to ask anything?
Does that mean we did a great job?
I think we covered quite
other.
a bit there, didn't we?
We did.
Anybody got any questions? I leave to final comments, our panel. Did a fabulous job from Colin. Thank you, Colin. They certainly did.
I think what I'll do, Sue, is turn the recording off at this point and then give a couple of minutes of unrecorded.
So Andrew's just put in a comment, thought it may be worth to mention part T of building regs, which came in October last year, which is a useful tool apparently. So thank you for that, Andrew.
Yeah, about the new buildings provisions, single sex toilets. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's definitely one to look out for, because I think when it comes to the toilet aspect, I think that's going to affect a lot of organizations that have a current building infrastructure and design that potentially, let's say, don't have gender neutral toilets, and this is going to bring us back round to other protected characteristics that's going to have an impact from this as well, because conversations that generally stems from this as well. Oh, well, we'll just make the disabled toilet gender neutral. It's always been gender neutral, so we'll just continue to keep it gender neutral. But then is that going to lead to a wider impact? If you've got a big organization, you've got a lot of people using the toilets and bathrooms. If we're now making the disabled toilets gender neutral, so trans people can then use those toilets, is that then going to have an impact on them accessing the bathroom as well? So then the infrastructure at the moment, if it's just single sex spaces, even if they are disabled friendly, you've now then got to design an alternative toilet